And so I want to begin this segment this way. If you've been online for the last, let's say, year, there's been a really good meme floating around. Basically, it says that it's a three-stage meme. It says, my grandfather died and his blood was filled with asbestos. My father died and his blood was filled with lead. And now my generation is filled with microplastics. Grace, how bad has it gotten?
Well, it's looking pretty bad, to be honest with you, Roman. A new study came out a few days ago saying that plastics in the brain are now showing, junk food is now basically the link between all of these brain conditions that we're seeing because of all of the plastics that are used to package junk food. And actually, Shelby here, she has a little spoon there you might have seen. She has a, a great demonstration for us.
So, okay. Plastics are a $700 billion industry across the globe. Keep that in mind. These things are everywhere. They have some of the most outlandish examples are finding a plastic bag at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest point on Earth, and also just a few thousand feet below the summit of Mount Everest. Okay? So keep that in mind, everywhere. Now, what if I told you that this spoon, the equivalent of this spoon, was inside your brain right now?
I would ask how it contributes to my depression.
Science says it does, actually, because that is one of many problems that are being linked now between the amassing amounts of plastic everywhere in our lives and now, unfortunately, in our bodies and our overall health.
So you're telling me a spoonful of plastic helps the depression go up?
Unfortunately.
Bring out Mary Poppins. We got her, guys.
It certainly seems that way.
But to be specific, so I think the study, which you told me before we started filming, was that it found 0.48% of the brain mass is plastic.
Yeah, by weight.
By weight.
Yes.
And so if you do the calculations, it winds up being that it's
about 0.5% of your brain's weight. Yes.
And that's how much a spoon weighs.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, let me ask you this. I like plastic. Like my pen is partly made out of plastic. There's a lot of good uses for it. Are there any benefits to having plastic in your body?
I can't think of any, personally, and science hasn't come up with any answers to that either. I mean, we're seeing links between this stuff and not only depression, we're also seeing dementia, Alzheimer's, inflammation, additional stress, obviously poor nutrition. Like, the list goes on and on with these problems, and the studies just keep pouring out. It's really interesting, too, because within roughly the last 6 years, we've seen an explosion in the interest in looking into the effects of these things, right? Which there's a very, personally, I find this extremely interesting and very telling statistic, right? So within the past 10 years, the amount of plastic in our bodies, in our brains specifically, has gone up about 50%, according to these studies.
So we had half a spoon.
And is this intergenerational, or is my generation just the guinea pigs, or how is this going?
It seems like it's affecting all of us. I mean, it's very hard to get away from. But here's the correlation to that. So not only has the plastic in our bodies gone up by 50%, but if you look at the rate at which global production of plastic goes up, it doubles every 10 years. So.
Okay, so the plastic is in the water or it's in the food? Like how is it exactly getting into our bodies?
Well, that's the thing. It's in everything. It's immensely saturating our oceans. We see that in, how many images have we all seen online of the massive pollution happening in our oceans, right? But it's more than that. So these things disintegrate, they leach into life. For instance, shellfish actually is one huge source of that. So, you eat some shellfish and you've absorbed all of the microplastics that animal had consumed before it reached you, right? But then there are other sources. So the things that we use every day, like hoses and car tires and other things, all of these things degrade, particularly when they're exposed to heat and over time, right? So all of those things. The clothes we wear, how much of our clothing in our closets is polyester? That's plastic, right? More than that, the food that we eat, everything is packaged, everything is processed. All of that has opportunity to leach materials into what we're eating. That's the majority of where it's coming from.
Well, let me ask you this. This is something I always wonder when I read about these studies, which is like, you have one study that says, oh, we looked at, this cross section of all America and everyone has microplastics in their body to some extent or something to that effect. And then another study that comes out and says, well, we studied it and we showed that microplastics are linked to, let's say, stroke, right? But then, how do you really study that if everybody's filled with microplastics? How do you get a real control group if everybody has them? How do you isolate that like this bad effect, for instance, depression. Like how do you isolate that depression is really being caused, I guess, or connected to the microplastics in the brain versus like the forever chemicals?
This is my own speculation, but I mean, I would say it also has a whole lot to do with how much processed food a given individual is consuming, right? So I think the national statistic is roughly 50% of the energy consumption for people in countries like the US, developed countries, is coming from ultra-processed foods, right? But then there is a broad range if you look a little deeper into that statistic. So people are taking in anywhere from roughly 12% to, I believe, 82% of their overall energy intake is coming from ultra-processed food. So if you were to look at a sample size from the lower end of that spectrum and compare it to the other end of that spectrum, you might see some interesting results.
Could it be that? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there are some studies that actually do sort of disagree with the idea that we could be getting the microplastics from the food that we're currently eating, or rather the packaging of the current food. So one doctor from the study from a few months ago, his name is Dr. Matthew Kempen, and he is a toxicology professor at the University of New Mexico. So he was one of the co-authors that put out the study about 3 months ago, talking about the 50% increase from around, I think it was 2016 to 2024, and microplastics in people's brains. Now, in an interview I was watching of his, he gave this interesting demonstration, like so, with a plastic bottle. So a lot of us think that, yeah, when you're drinking out of plastic, when you're having all these processed food with these plastic wrappers, that's where it's coming from. And we do know for sure that chemicals are leaching out of these everyday plastics that we're using. But Dr. Kempen was saying, actually, the effect is not immediate. He was saying that if you take a plastic bottle and you pour out the water and you refill it and repeat it 10,000 times and you weigh it, it will still weigh the same amount. The microplastics are not actually shedding in the day-to-day use or everyday wear and tear of the plastic. He's like, the people that are actually feeling the effect are people's children and grandchildren 10, 20 years down the road. And from his point of view, the primary place that these plastics are actually coming from is in the form of all of this plastic junk. You know, so many millions or trillions of tons every year going into the landfill, or unfortunately in many cases into the ocean. And over time, over many, many years, these are breaking down smaller and smaller and smaller, and ultimately getting into the groundwater. And then from the groundwater, that goes everywhere, right? That goes into every stream, every creek, river, and ultimately then the ocean. And then that feeds, you know, everything from vegetables, agriculture, from farm animals. It all ultimately, you know, makes its way into us through our diet. And there's really no way to escape it, essentially, because it's everywhere. So even if you do try to avoid processed foods, which is always a good thing to do, or try to avoid plastic, you're not actually necessarily going to limit your intake of microplastics. Bigger plastics and the chemicals from plastics, certainly, but not necessarily microplastics, because it's found
as you're
further down the
describing
line.
that, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, gets into your brain, also crosses the placenta barrier, right? I assume. And as you're describing that, I'm just imagining what must be happening in the womb, right? Everything that's coming, tiny little baby, small space, and it's, you know, coming
Yeah, if it's happening in utero, like babies are being born with the plastic already in them. It's a new part of their you know, DNA, a new part of their makeup. I'm wondering though, when you mention that it gets into the groundwater, it gets into everything. If you have a reverse osmosis, if you distill your water, you know, how do you get these things out of there?
Well, it sounds like a little bit of a black pill day, not that I like to go down that road, but also according to Dr. Kempen, a water filter really does nothing. And he was essentially saying, because in this interview, someone was asking him, you know, this sounds so horrible, what can we do? And really what he was saying is essentially...
Mars.
He did say Mars as one option, but, you know, he hit on a fundamental point that I really feel like hits on the heart of the issue. And he was essentially saying, you need to think about future generations, because there's not actually really that much we can do right now, but we can limit our plastics for future generations. And the reason that made me think of what you were saying is he said some well-intentioned people might want to get a water filter to filter this out in your water. But he said that doesn't really get out very many, and that water filter could have 10 times the plastic than what you're trying to get out of your water. And then that plastic ultimately in the future is going to contribute again to this breakdown, this decomposing of plastic into microplastics that then your children and grandchildren will intake. So I think, you know, plastic really exploded because it's so convenient. It's waterproof, it's durable. We think it makes our life so much easier, but that's really short-sighted thinking. And now that's catching up with us. So he's essentially saying we need to be looking towards the future to make it better for our children and grandchildren and future generations. But right now, maybe we just have to bear the brunt of it.
This is the thing that always amazes me, because if you think about it, it's just been happening for, big picture-wise, such a short amount of time, right? Really, it's only since World War II that we've had the ubiquity of plastic. So in that short amount of time, we've introduced so much to the environment. But it also makes me think, would it be that hard to get rid of them all? I mean, I know we've gotten used to it, but it was just, we managed just perfectly fine.
Cindy, I'm looking around this room, everything here, that screen, that camera, this chair, my glasses, everything is. My brain.
And on that note,
fiber optics.
Just for sake of reference here, keep in mind how small these pieces are. These are bits of plastic small enough to fit into human cells, right? That's quite hard to filter out. I don't know if that can stand up to a water filter.
Say something positive, please, Shelby.
Okay, there is actually good news on this front. I'm glad you bring that up. Okay, so in order to help counter some of these issues, there are in development many different alternatives like bioplastics. Some of them are made out of algae, some are made out of seaweed, and the industry's already taking off. I believe the latest numbers are that across the globe, it's worth about 50 million right now. So that's progress.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you just tangibly, there has been so much progress on this front. So it's no secret around here that I'm from beautiful little New Zealand down under. And when I first came to the United States about 5-6 years ago, oh my goodness, I can just not tell you the shock and horror that I found when I first came here. So when I first moved here...
Tell us what you really think, Grace. My gosh.
Go back.
Relating to plastic, guys. Not everything. America's a wonderful, wonderful place. But no, so I first moved here. I was in Queens, and I needed some household items. So I went to Dollar Tree. Okay, it's all made in China. It's all plastic. Not the best place. But I brought about 10, 15 items. And to my horror, the woman put each individual item in a plastic bag. And these were not breakable items. It was probably more plastic. We're talking about kitchen utensils and some little storage things. And then when she had all my 10, 15 items, then she put them in an even bigger plastic bag. And to someone from New Zealand, and over there, using plastic, it's like blasphemy. It hurts, And I was just so shocked. I cannot tell you. And I thought my father better never come here because he gets even more upset about plastic than I do. But just in these past, 5 years, the amount of plastic in New York and in New Jersey and other places I'm, frequently at has decreased so much. I mean, I know there's been a lot of pushback. Everyone loves their plastic bags and their plastic straws. Now, I'm not advocating for paper straws. Those things are no fun to use. But I feel like, the city has adopted paper bags really well. And you see a lot less plastic in the supermarkets, And I think that there's a lot of progress on that front, and some people knock it, but I think it's really catching on. So I think that that's, really worthwhile.
Part of me wonders if that has to do with major metropolitan areas also, because I absolutely agree. Here in New York, that's, it's a great city. It has its faults, but that is one thing that we do absolutely get right here is, you see people walking around with cloth tote bags and other things, Part of it, perhaps, is if you have an hour train ride to get to work every day, you want to, have enough infrastructure with you to get through the day and carry around what you need. But the other is perhaps a conscientiousness, which I think could be an absolute benefit to us as a country to expand and us as a world.
Okay. So that was going to be my sort of like pivot at the end of this discussion, which is how do we get out of the black pill mentality?
Well, I would say, I think that it's really easy to get very frightened, I would say, because everything now is coming out toxic. And, the idea of microplastics in your brain, that could kind of send you into a bit of a state of panic and anxiety. And I know some people that are so frightened, they won't eat anything but organic. They don't want to touch plastic, anything. And it's really boxed them in and their way of living. And I can completely understand and definitely sympathize with that mentality. I mean, I remember, Chris, you probably know the story, shortly after the paper straws were developed and, really caught on, there was stories coming out that the paper straws were also toxic. And people are just going, oh my goodness, you know, everything we do, everything still somehow turns out to be toxic. But I feel like, you know, you can't underestimate the power of the human mind and the human spirit when it comes to your health. I mean, even if you just look over the past 200 years, you know, humans are living so much longer than they ever used to. We still have a lot of health problems, you know. We don't really understand all of the nuances about exactly, you know, why that is. Obviously, we have better science, better medicine, living conditions, cleanliness, but you know, human beings are really quite powerful, and we won't get into them now because I know we don't have time, but there's a lot of studies that show the power of the mind on the human body, you know, when it comes to health. And I want to give a quick shout out to our friend and colleague, Mackay Albert over at Epic Health. You know, he's a reporter for Epic Health. He is writing some incredible, fantastic pieces there that all have to do with the mind, body, and spirit, and really looking at, you know, health from a much more holistic perspective, drawing upon both Eastern and Western traditions. And there's tangible things that, you know, you can do this very moment to improve your health. So I think viewers out there, you know, don't forget that your health is like ultimately in your own hands. Don't go down the black pill road.
Okay.
Well said.
So okay. So just to sum up, basically, our generation, we need to change our vibes in our minds. For the future generations, we can try to get them out of the environment.
And stop using plastic. It's not just vibes. You got to take tangible physical steps too to reduce plastic, absolutely.
All right, I can't agree more. Thank you guys so much. All right, I know exactly what you're thinking. That was a great clip you just watched. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to follow and also check out either these videos or maybe they're on this side. I don't know which side they're on, but we set it up. So these are the videos that YouTube is suggesting to you as the best ones that you'll probably like the most. So check them out, this side,